Thank you for that introduction, and thank you guys for coming out on an early Saturday morning. I know it's tough. Every day on the way to my studio, I would pass by this guy. He was just out on the street selling his art. And while he told me he was happy, I couldn't imagine that he was doing particularly well. Yet, this is the image that often comes to our mind when we think about artists. I would like to challenge you to know that art can take you to many places. It can take you to Egypt, or China, or even to London. All sorts of places. I was sitting in a cafe waiting for a friend to arrive when, as one does, I started scanning the room. There, at a table nearby, sat 4 people. A smartly dressed woman, 2 men in white shirts and loosened ties. But what really caught my attention was a woman slumped over a bowl of pasta, early 20s, I would guess her age, whose mohawk, black jeans, matching vest, and colorful print shirt was quite a contrast to her comrades. Just then, the older woman said, "That's what I've been trying to tell her." All eyes focused on that younger woman. What is she going to do with an art degree? "Mom," she said, "I've told you before, I'm okay. This is something I've always wanted to do." "But how are you going to make a living?" said one of the guys. "I'll get by," she said. Then the other guy replied with the nail on the creative coffin. "Get by? When are you going to get a real job?" And as my friend joined me, that young girl slumped in her chair. I couldn't help but get that thought out of my mind. When are you going to get a real job? How often have we heard this statement from well-meaning friends, concerned adults, or advisors whose only vision of an arts education is a life of poverty? But no one wants to be limited. Author Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, said, "Everyone takes the limits of his own vision for the limits of the world." As artists, we see the possibilities in the impossible. All we need is a little support along the way. All we need is someone to say, "I'm by your side." And that's where my story begins. Growing up, my parents supported and encouraged my art making. The biggest fan, though, had to be my grandmother. You see, I was around 8 years old, and I did this picture for my grandmother of her favorite comic strip character, and that was Mickey Mouse. See, it was the occasion of her birthday, and all the relatives were gathered in my grandmother's small living room, the only room in the house where all the furniture was still covered in plastic. Your thighs on a sweaty day would cling to that cushion and not let go. So there we were. My relatives presented her with their beautiful presents, and I gave her my drawing, and she loved it. She said it's the first picture I had ever drawn for her, and she would cherish it always. Now, I didn't believe her at the time, but she soon proved me wrong. You see, anytime I was at my grandmother's house and a friend came over, she would show them this picture. If a neighbor dropped by or a person from church came by just for a cup of coffee, she would say, "Look at what my grandbaby did for me. He's going to be a real artist someday." And I got to tell you, as I grew older, it got more and more embarrassing. Oh, sorry, just a little emotion with her. I brought my girlfriend over to meet my grandmother. And we're sitting on the couch drinking lemonade when she jumps up and says, "Oh, I got something to show you." And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, she is not going to bring out, yes, she did, that drawing of Mickey Mouse. Now, by then, it was well worn at the sides. And I said to Grandma, I said, "Grandma, why do you always bring out this picture? I mean, I'm getting much better at drawing, and I can do a much better job of creating a picture for you." And she just smiled and said, "Baby, I know you can draw, but this is the first picture you did for me, and I'm going to keep it always." It was at that point that I realized the power of personal art making. We all need people to support us. When we feel supported, we have the power to go and do impossible things. Growing up, my parents struggled to make ends meet. But some of my most memorable experiences were when my dad would take us out to go and collect lightning bugs, or when we would gather on Sunday evenings to watch National Geographic. You see, art making for me was a way of escape, a way of making sense in a world that just didn't get me. I was a skinny, geeky kid with an active imagination. I loved going into the woods to look for gnomes or fairies or insects. I love that picture. I would make these incredible detailed drawings of imaginative places that I believed that were out there. It fed my desire to go out and have adventures. I thought I would, as a teenager, I turned my room into a wooded haven. I put cheap bamboo wallpaper up on the walls. I put big plants outside of my closet. I had this tape called The Sounds of Nature that played constantly. I released crickets and lizards and my pet hamster Rodney, all in an effort to replicate the woods of Narnia. But no matter how often I went into those woods, I never found Narnia. And it wasn't until years later that I finally came out of the closet, but that's another story. I went on to college and majored in art. And I thought I could blend art with my love of insects when I saw a course offered on entomology. But unfortunately, these were my grades. And a D in biology wasn't going to get me far. On top of that, I learned that artists weren't the most happiest of people. We all know the stories of artists who were alcoholics or depressed or struggled to make ends meet. I couldn't go down that road. So I took the safe road. I enrolled in commercial art at the Art Institute of Philadelphia. And there, I blossomed. I graduated at the top of my class and received an invitation or an offer to be a commercial artist at an advertising firm in New Jersey. I thought I would be set for life doing what I loved. Unfortunately, I realized that creativity has gone out of advertising. It's not like Mad Men. Creativity was replaced by conformity, and innovation bowed to budgets. I felt it was time to move on. And so I did. I wandered into other positions. I was a missionary, a youth worker, and even a teacher. And although I explored, my parents were always right there, reminding me gently of who I was and what I was capable of doing. "That's nice, babes," they would say, "but what about your art?" By this time, I was newly married and director of a job placement service in Denver, Colorado. Art for me was far, far away. I was stressed, unhappy, and didn't know where to go. And then one day, on February 16th, 1990, a client came in with this news. Keith Haring died at age 31. It was like a blow. You see, Keith Haring was this bright New York graffiti artist and supported by many an art student. He was our idol. He blended commercial art with fine art. And now he was dead. And as I read that article, I wondered aloud, who's going to take his place? And that client looked dead in my eyes and said, "You will." It was like a rebirth. See, we all need people to ignite that spark of creativity within us and help us move forward. I committed to doing art once a week. I did a series based off of the wonderful landscape of Colorado. These paintings were only as big as, say, my 2 middle fingers, but it was a start for me. Yet it wasn't enough for me to quit my day job and go into full-time art making. I just did not want to go down that road of struggle. Then, on a mild autumn morning in 1992, the stress and burnout caught up with me. I went in for a health check and was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I would be dependent on insulin for the rest of my life. Diabetes was a blow, and it changed my life, but for the better. You see, it gave me that push that I needed to go into full-time art making again and quit my day job. The first series I started was called Remembrance. In this one, I remembered the passing of my dear grandmother. And in the other, I remembered the passing of my dear scorpion, Scorpo. I went on to do another series. This is entitled War Heart, after the terrible things that I had noticed that were happening in the world. And this one, Between Hope and a Prayer. And that's where I felt my life was. Several years later, felt me at a new place. I was teaching at a school of the arts, still exhibiting, when I received an invitation to go to New Mexico and study under an artist I had admired for a long time. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I met so many artists. One of the artists that I met was from Egypt. We did a show together, the success of which prompted me to go overseas. But I was still bound by fear. See, I didn't know how I could function overseas in a new country with diabetes. So I was having lunch with a friend and telling her about my situation and saying, "I just don't know how I'm going to do this." And she stopped me in mid-sentence and said, "Robert, if you follow your dream, people will come beside you to help you on your way." And she could not have been more true. With that in mind, I went to Egypt. I created a series of drawings, postcard size, that talked about that journey. I exhibited in a place that you would never think is an art gallery. Art took me to China, where I had my first solo exhibition. But not only that, I helped students dream big and know that their possibilities are endless. Art took me to Melbourne, Australia, where I exhibited again and learned that there are endless possibilities for a person who follows their dream. I also learned that as I exhibited, more opportunities opened up, more doors flung open for me to go and do what I was created to do. This vulnerability gave me the strength to do the C series. The C series was encouraged by my survival of the 2004 tsunami. My art became vulnerable and personable. It spoke of the power of forgiveness and how new heights and new sights can be found. I also created a series based off of a poem by John Donne. No man is an island in and of themselves, but we are all connected to the whole. And this series led to something called the life landscape. It's where I would take art and tell a story. We've lost that story right now. Oh. Every piece of this artwork talks about that person's life. Everything you see either says where they've been, where they celebrated, where they met, where their family went to school. It's one of the most joyous, incredible journeys I've ever been on. See, everybody has a story. All we have to do is be creative enough to let them tell it. Sir Anthony Seldon says, many people go to their grave with their song still inside them. I challenge you to help people sing their song and get their voice out there. Follow your art and turn the world upside down. Thank you.